Welcome to Behind the Radio, Season 3.
Good evening, curious minds out there across the world, and welcome to the Behind the Radio for Season 3, Episode 10, Mind to Kill, the Great Amherst Mystery. This was a wild one. It remains one of the best documented hauntings of all time. It wasn't just the Teed family Hubble, or even just the various people that were mentioned as, or within the story, who were witness to the events that took place. Aside from doctors and clergymen, a large portion of the residents of Amherst, and even a lot of the surrounding areas and beyond, were actually privy to seeing and hearing various parts of the haunting. While some of it may possibly be explained as just being parlor tricks and intentional deception, and elements of Esther's torment could potentially be dismissed as a mental health crisis. We'll get into all these theories a little bit more in a minute, but other events that were recorded really aren't so easily explained away. The Teed family weren't just crazies. They were actually very well-respected, upstanding members of the Amherst community, if you will, which is a big reason that the case was so impactful for the residents there at the time, and probably why it's stuck around for all these years. Walter Hubble is an interesting character, too. There seems to kind of be two primary schools of thought when it comes to his involvement, and like I said, we'll get into both of those angles a little more in depth in just a minute. Before we dive back into the events of this insane haunting, how are you beautiful people doing today? Finally starting to cool down a little and feel like fall, where I'm at least, which is definitely a welcome change in my opinion, especially after a long and ridiculously hot summer filled with me toting around a couple 100 pounds of equipment, setting it up, performing, breaking it down, loading it in and out, all that good stuff while wearing a suit all summer. Needless to say, I'm ready for some cooler weather. Plus, I've always loved this time of the year. Fall, and particularly Halloween, has always been that time of year that I always really look forward to the most when I was little, especially. And I could do without winter, and I'm sure I'll be complaining about freezing and being sick of the cold here in a month or two. But for now, at least, I'm really glad for the change of weather. I hope that you guys are all enjoying the new spooky season schedule that we're doing for this season. I just figured it'd be a good way to try and squeeze out a few more episodes than we normally do this month, without all of the super research intensive stuff that goes into a normal episode. There's still quite a bit that goes into these. Just because I have a problem, I insist on multiple sources and being as accurate as possible and covering everything in a lot of these cases, so which I know probably takes some of the fun out of it, especially for these crazier stories at times, but I really have tried to balance it a little bit better with these and to also do more with the soundtrack and soundscaping to them to try and kind of, hopefully, I guess, at least make it a little more fun and immersive for you. But I'd love to hear your take on it, though. If you like this, if you don't like this, we can switch things around next season, depending on what your thoughts are. There's going to be a quick poll on the Spotify page. I may also post it to Facebook. We'll just have to see about that. But I would really appreciate if you guys would take just a second and respond. It's just one question, and it really helps me know about the direction to take the show in. Because, the more I know about your thoughts on things, the better I can make the show. And the more I can kind of tune that to be an experience that you get a little bit more out of, I guess. And I hate to harp on it. I know I say it every time, and everyone else does too. But comments are also really helpful, both to get more exposure for the show, but primarily just to help me know what I'm doing right or wrong, and what you guys like or you don't like, so that I can try and make the show a little more enjoyable for everybody. Either way, I really appreciate you guys tuning in, regardless if you interact or not. But let me stop rambling, and let's go ahead and dig into this last episode. Okay, so wild episode there. I did my best to cover that as accurately as I know it to be. I guess is a good way to put that. Going from contemporary news sources, and of course a lot of it came from Hubble's book that supposedly was written directly from his journal that he kept during the time that he was there, and interviews that he did with the family. There is a potentially key detail that I left out of the story though. And I did this just because it's been often cited as a reason to just dismiss the entire case. Anytime skeptics can find like a little nugget like this, they tend to use that to excuse away everything that happened, when a lot of what happened really doesn't fit into something that would be influenced by this, in my opinion at least. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. I guess primarily I just didn't want it to color the lens through which the story is being told. If you're here, though, chances are you want the whole story. And I guess it's kind of impossible to tell you all of that without at least first covering what happened to Esther on the night of August 28th, 1878. So Esther was going on a ride with this guy. He was courting her. I think she kind of had a crush on him, but they weren't extremely familiar. They hadn't really hung out, as best I could tell. And this guy's name was Bob McNeil, and he was a local shoemaker. Now, if you paid really close attention to the episode, that description already likely seemed kind of familiar to you, as the main spirit that was referred to as a demon and a fire fiend by Walter Hubble, Bob Nickel, was also said to be a shoemaker in life, and kind of similar names, but we'll dig into that a little more in a minute. So anyways, Esther and Bob were out on a carriage ride that afternoon, and they were heading out of the city into a very rural area, like a little grove of trees. And it was starting to get late. Looked like it could storm. Esther was, kind of like, what are we doing here? I need to be headed home. And at this, Bob would pull the carriage over, and he drew a big revolver out of his coat pocket, aimed it at Esther's heart, and told her to get out. I guess unsure of what nefarious plans he had for her, Esther was terrified, and she refused to move, and insisted that he go ahead and just take her home. And her refusal infuriated Bob, and he became more insistent and began making his way back up onto the buggy like he was going to pull her off of it and force her to comply, I suppose. But in a stroke of absolute pure luck, it just so happened that right at this time, another carriage was making its way along that same desolate stretch of road. And when Bob heard it approaching in the distance, he got scared. He was afraid, I guess, if he persisted that he was likely to get caught. So he just tucked away the revolver and got back into his seat, pulling away before the other carriage could get to him. And at this point, it's now quite dark, and it's began raining pretty hard. And Bob's still really pissed off, and cracking the reins, and drove Esther towards her house at top speed, freaking her out even further. And by the time she got back home, her clothes were soaked through and through, and she was said to have been in a hysterical condition. Make of that what you will. When researching this element for his book, Walter Hubble would find that Bob had a, quote, cruel disposition, and as a boy had been known to, and this is kind of disgusting and infuriating, but it's part of the story, so bear with me. But he was known to have skinned cats and let them run around suffering like that until they died. So suffice it to say, Bob was a piece of shit. We're just going to go ahead and say that. Bob was a piece of shit. And to what degree this experience actually affected the events that would follow is kind of hard to say. But I personally would struggle to believe that it played absolutely no role. I also don't think that it really accounts for 80 to 90% of what went on. Just, again, in my opinion. But in the epilogue of Hubble's book, he comments about his various theories that he held throughout the course of the story, and kind of dismisses them, each one, as, facts change, and he changes his opinion. But he finally ends up concluding that Bob McNeil was basically, though he uses more antiquated terms, but was basically possessed by a demon, an evil spirit, whatever, of Bob Nickel. And after that incident, it basically just kind of attached itself to Esther, and she carried it home with her. He also mentions that one of the six spirits, who made themselves known that one time was named Eliza McNeil, and she claimed to be Bob McNeil's sister. There wasn't really like any kind of a big deal made about that during the book, and he really kind of just brings it up in passing at the end of it, but something to consider, I suppose. But I'm going to go ahead and just include Hubble's full book for you in PDF format. I'm going to stick that in the Discord if anybody wants to dig in a little deeper on it and actually read it for themselves. Hubble, like I said in the episode, had a history with the supernatural, but from the perspective of a skeptic and a debunker, particularly of mediums. Basically, I think I briefly touched on it in the story, but he was well familiar with stagecraft, being an actor, and familiar with the mechanical devices and techniques used to create like knocking sounds and illusions of kind of the stuff that spiritualists of the time would be using to fool people. And also, he was familiar with a lot of the techniques used by the magicians of that time. So he felt pretty confident that he would have been able to detect or spot any kind of deceptions had Esther or her family been, I guess, faking the event somehow. He got into that after a close friend lost their mother, and then they got sucked into the world of fake mediums and were getting ripped off, fleeced by these people on a consistent basis. And so he decided to try and break them out of that and launch his own investigation of them. And fake mediums were a dime a dozen at this point in history, for the record. He decided to, expose one after another that his friend was dealing with, just to kind of show him that, hey, this is all BS. You're getting taken for your money and it's not doing you any good, because he felt that it was damaging his friend's mental health. And according to Hubble, it was this success that led him to head to the house in Amherst that he had been reading so much about in the press. And I guess it was an attempt to try to prove that it was all fake and to put an end to the quote-unquote mystery. And he also states in his book that the whole intention of taking her on that speaking tour was also to try to expose the mystery and to make money off it while doing so. I mean, he openly admits that. Which brings us to Hubble's true intentions, which really kind of follows along two schools of thought, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, but it's really just two paths, let's say, that you can go down in looking at this, which is either he legitimately came to expose the mystery and profit, as he says, and then when he was unable to disprove it, he became convinced that it was real, and he just kind of got sucked into the story. And he was keeping a journal, as he was known to do anyway, and then he later decided to just publish the information in his journal later on down the road as like an afterthought. The other version goes along the lines of money being at the forefront the entire time. And when the lecture tour crashed and burned, I guess you could say, he still remained a skeptic, but just pivoted to trying to capitalize off of helping to push this story, with the plan being all along to write a book about it. And both of those seem, I guess, equally likely at first glance, but as tends to be the case more times than not, the truth likely kind of lies somewhere in that gray area in between them. While journalism, especially during the time that our story took place, is rife for sensationalizing things, it may be worth at least considering that several major publications were already covering the story well before Hubble inserted himself into the picture. And like I said, it's widely considered one of the most well-documented poltergeist cases in the world. And there were many first-hand witnesses that really ran the gamut from doctors, clergymen, authors, ordinary townsfolk, wealthy and powerful people, newspaper reporters, all of which kind of, I feel, lend a little bit of credence, at least, to the story holding weight beyond what Hubble documented. At the same time, I find it hard to completely dismiss the trauma of Esther's near essay playing a role in the events, or at least influencing how she experienced what was taking place. As much as I would love to just tie this up into a neat little bow for you guys and give a solid singular explanation for what took place, I don't honestly feel that any one explanation really covers enough ground to, I guess, fully encapsulate and define what took place. I did write down a few little notes. If you can't tell, I'm definitely just shooting from the hip for 90% of this tonight. But I did write down a couple of things that are alternative explanations that people have, put together. And I guess each one could kind of account at least for some of what was purported to have happened. I don't think that any one of them fully explains it, though. But I'll give you my personal thoughts on everything at the end of it. The first one of those being, like we kind of touched on a minute ago, it being a hoax or a fraud just for attention and financial gain. Esther may have faked some of the phenomena to seek attention, because at this point she was going through personal and family upheaval. Aside from her incident with Bob, she had also been dealing with the death of her mother, and her father had just got remarried and wasn't really in her life. That's why she was staying with the Teed family. And this could have started, small and just gradually grew into a public spectacle as more people and more eyes and attention fell on the case, and especially once Hubble got involved. The second one that's worth at least looking at is psychological or dissociative state. Beyond the trauma that we've discussed, Esther's symptoms like swelling, rigidity, seizures, and trance-like states align decently with hysteria or dissociation triggered by extreme stress, i.e. basically like what we would call a psychological breakdown. And if we look at it this way, she may have unconsciously caused some of these disturbances during altered mental states and been totally unaware of her actions, like a fugue state or PTSD response, rather than it being deliberate trickery. And the next potential quote-unquote debunking focuses on, and this one's very unlikely in my personal opinion, but it's been cited several times, so I want to cover it. Some may have been caused by human interference from Bob McNeil, basically saying that he continued to torment her by perhaps sneaking around to create noises or move objects when no one was around. He may have been behind setting some of the fires, or even the one that stabbed her with the objects. I guess in order to get revenge, or to make her seem like she was totally crazy, just to try to lessen the impact of, if she told someone about what he did, they would be less likely to believe her if they thought she was crazy and had all these ghost things happening. Which, I guess that's kind of a possibility, but I just can't imagine this guy sneaking around constantly doing all this stuff with so much that was going on. But in this view, the phenomena is interpreted as targeted harassment rather than ghost activity. Considering the case as a whole, this Scooby-Doo angle here, I think it kind of falls apart under any real scrutiny, which leads us to the fourth one: exaggeration and exploitation, meaning reports may have been inflated by sensationalism, with Hubble's later biased account dominating the narrative in the name of profit. The activity only seemed to occur around Esther, seemed to follow her, and then later ceased after public humiliation, e.g. jail time for the arson, which you could see that would make her want to lessen the attention on her, and she even later relocated, perhaps suggesting that it wasn't an independent entity, but more so tied to her circumstances and her enablers. There's also room for quite a bit of overlap among several of those, and taken as a whole may highlight how 19th century limitations in psychology and forensics could turn what may have been just a personal crisis met with enabling and financial motivations into a quote-unquote mystery. If everything occurred as it was said to have, though, nothing really provides a satisfactory answer to explain the happenings. Not even all of those skeptical takes combined do. The problem lies in the fact that we are now so far removed from the events that happened, or were alleged to have taken place, that there's really no definitive way to know how much was fact and how much was either exaggerated at best or even totally fabricated at worst. Therein lies the issue with investigating historical mysteries in general, and why so much about our collective past is lost or only told from one perspective, which, naturally, is typically from the perspective of the victor. So in the end, we're really left with two conclusions that we can choose from. Either we take the events at face value, because we have no solid ground from which to repudiate the claims, or we reject the possibility full stop, because we have no way to validate the claims beyond one man's full account and the assortment of contemporary reporting, which has been proven to be subject to bias and even all-out fabrication. I don't see much validity in fence-sitting with this case, though. To admit that any part of the hunting took place as it was recorded honestly defies the norm of what we imagine is possible to have taken place. So if any of it was possible and happened as stated, then it becomes virtually impossible to stand on solid ground in saying that another part was definitely not true and couldn't have taken place. In cases where we're unable to retroactively prove or disprove what took place definitively, we really only have the option of believing it or not. That's what it comes down to. Because at the end of the day, all we are left with are opinions anyway. So, I guess what do you believe took place? Which side of the fence do you find yourself on? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about this. Do you agree that a case like this ultimately boils down to a binary choice, like I said? Or is there a middle ground that I'm overlooking that I guess makes more sense? I ask because, like I said, I'm genuinely curious here. And if you have a take that would shine more light on this case or make more sense than what I've brought up, then I would really love to be enlightened by it. I try to learn as much as I can about any subject, and I can only go so far with this one because of the limited sources on it. So if you've got, some input that you'd like to give, bring it on. I would love to hear about it. So now, normally I would just give you guys my thoughts on it some and then cover some news stories of other stuff that I want to talk about. I just honestly don't know what I think about this one, which is a big reason that I wanted to cover it. It's impossible to prove, sure, but it's equally impossible to completely disprove it, or I guess even confidently, in my opinion at least, dismiss it altogether. It's just one of those stories that you run into that seems to leave a lot of questions and very few, if any, real answers. Having experienced my share of paranormal incidents throughout my life, I certainly can't say that it's totally impossible. And I've been witness to several things that I cannot explain and would otherwise think were impossible if somebody told me, to be honest. Some of these I've shared already, but there have been many more. And in lieu of talking about the ever-increasingly depressing news around the world right now, I figured we'd keep things in the spirit of Halloween, and I'll just get into a little bit of those now for you. Okay, so when my family and I moved down here to the south from Cincinnati, Ohio, my dad took a way lower paying position. He was working as a foreman at a Ford factory up there, but there wasn't anything that really translated to that here, and he ended up taking a night security job at TVA at the nuclear facility. And my mother at the time was just starting her schooling, secondary schooling for the career that she was going into, so she wasn't really able to put very much money in at that time either. So what we were able to do was finance a decent plot of land for a suspiciously low price, along with a single wide trailer to put on it. The land was about 7.5 acres, and in the early 80s should have been out of our reach, to be honest. It was the most affordable and the largest plot that we found, though, so my parents jumped on it. While they were in the talks to buy it or whatever, the realtors disclosed that the previous owner had been shot in the front yard over a dispute that his son had gotten into with some kind of pretty rough people. I believe she hinted or alluded to the fact that it was over drugs without really saying it, but I guess that they figured, who cares, it's cheap and nicer than anything else that we've seen so far. So besides, at that point in time, both of them were hardened skeptics, and neither of them believed in ghosts or hauntings or anything like that anyway, so that was kind of like the last thing they were worried about. It was just a footnote. So anyways, they bought it, and they got a trailer, and we moved in, and it was great at first. Honestly, I mean, it was a total culture shock for me, but it was great. It was almost idyllic. We were out in the country. It was just us. A lot of woods to run around and play in, which I did constantly in my youth. But it wouldn't take long before things started happening. little small stuff at first. The TV would turn on at random or off. The faucet in the sink, in the kitchen, and both in the bathroom as well, would just cut on with no one anywhere around it. Things that skeptics like my parents could pretty easily come up with some sort of excuse to explain away, i.e. the electrical has issues, the power surges are messing with the TV, the water pressure isn't regulated, or there's a leak in the valve causing the pressure to build up and cut the sink on. Little did we know that was just the start of all this, though. So a few weeks after we'd moved in, maybe, I was playing out in the front yard, and I noticed that there was this spot. It was like a circle, maybe 3 feet across in circumference, but no grass would grow on it, and the dirt was like pitch black. To this day, I've never seen a spot like this. I have no explanation for it, but it was just this black spot of earth where nothing would grow, not even moss. And mind you, my front yard at that time was on about a 75-degree slope, so it's not like anybody was parking a car there and it was runoff from that, or there's really no reasonable excuse for why that spot existed. But it struck young me as being extremely odd. It was strange enough that I immediately went inside and told my parents about it. And they didn't have an excuse for this one, but they also seemed pretty unconcerned and probably just told me that it was likely just something on the surface that was killing the grass or something. Overly curious me went back out the next day with a beach pail and a little shovel, and I started digging to see what it was. I really wanted to know if it just kept going down and was like that. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a surface issue. Whatever the cause was, it went as far down as I could dig. Black as night, all the way down. But put a pin in that for now. It'll come up at the very end. To try and go through everything that I experienced at that house would take a very long, full episode or more. So for the sake of this episode, I'm just going to touch on a few events that were kind of a catalyst while we were there and that I still vividly remember. One of those being the one that relates kind of to, well, that one situation in the story that I mentioned briefly. We had lived there for a little while. I'm not sure exactly how long, but I do know that at this point I was in the 3rd grade, and that's when things really escalated around me. What was just like random events and odd sounds seemed to kind of coalesce into some seemingly unified power that was damned and determined to make my life their hell. I remember the first incident in this series of events vividly, so much so that it still affects how I sleep to this very day, as a grown-ass adult, yes. It was the week before Halloween. I remember that specifically, and I'll explain why. That year, like pretty much every year as a kid, I was going to be a vampire for Halloween. And I'd already secured my costume at this point, and even talked my mom, somehow, into buying me a little rubber bat. My 80s babies might remember this. It was the kind with the rubber strands on top so that you could wrap it over your finger and make the wings look like they're flapping. And I was super excited about it, because I'd seen somebody else with one the prior year, and I hadn't wanted that damn bat for a year at this point, so I was really hyped that I got it. And I kept it in this small box that was beside my bed, next to my radio, and I would occasionally just check on it, as a child would, or at least a weird one like me. And I'd pull that thing out and sneak around and play with it pretty much every day leading up to Halloween, and then usually be told that I'm going to break it before Halloween and to put it away. So I would. So I was laying in bed, I was trying to fall asleep. It was abnormally hot for October that night, which really isn't that uncommon for Alabama, I guess. And so I was trying to seek out cold spots on the bed with like my hands and my feet. You reach up under the cold side of the pillow, or try to find a spot where you haven't laid just to make yourself feel a little bit cooler. And sure, I could have just kicked the covers off, but I'm still a kid, and I've already experienced my share of weird crap there. So needless to say, my covers were staying right there in place, because you never know, I might need to hide. And we all know that pulling the covers over your head makes you invisible. So I was literally prepared to sweat to death before they were going anywhere. Anyway, I'm stretching out, hand under pillow, a little cooler, feet seeking towards the bottom of the bed to try and cool them down, when my right foot hit something. It was unexpected, but I wasn't thinking that it was, anything crazy. So I kept kind of like moving my foot up and down and stretching out a little more and feeling it, trying to kind of get a sense of the shape of it. And then just all of a sudden, I realized what it was that I was touching, and that was a wrinkled hand. Like I could feel the nails, I could feel the knuckles, like it was vivid in my mind. And I immediately sucked both feet up right up under my butt and ducked down underneath the covers. My mind was racing to try to explain what just happened. Then it kind of hits me that it has to be that toy bat. And if you recall, if you've seen these, they had sort of a veiny texture, for lack of a better term, along the wings. It was very textured, best I can describe it. So feeling a little bit of relief, I guess, from that realization that I had, and relaxing slightly, I just tell myself that I must have forgotten to put it up, and I just, didn't see it when I got in bed or made the bed or whatever. It was just that. But just to put my fears at rest and to confirm that my theory was right, I went ahead and reached over and opened up the top to the box that I kept it in, just to show myself that it's in there and I can chill. Lean further to darken the room, can't really see the shadow in the box. Pale glow of the nightlight all the way across the room, not doing a lot. But I reach in, and the bat's in there. So panic sets in. I don't dare scream or go running from my covers. Yeah, I do. I just start sprinting down the hallway. Dash into my mom's room, my parents' room rather, mumbling my story 90 miles an hour at them. So my mom gets up, takes me back in there to show me that it's nothing, takes me back, throws back the covers. I cringe when she does it. I'm expecting to see something super creepy, but there's nothing there. So, of course, I'm told it was just a nightmare and to lay back down and go to sleep and not to bother him again, even though I was definitely wide awake for the entirety of that process. So that was night one. The next real event that I remember is the one that I mentioned that paralleled the Amherst story. I'm going to be completely honest with you here. My childhood, it wasn't the greatest, as I'm sure many of us can probably say in one regard or another. But due to certain events, a lot of it was, or kind of became, compressed or even deleted entirely. Or I guess at least from a psychological standpoint, walled off to my conscious mind for protection. So I can't be 100% certain about how far apart these two events were. I know that I was still in the third grade, but it could have been the next night or months later for all I know. But it seems like once these things started and it started getting bad, it kind of all happened pretty quick. So anyways, I'm laying in bed, and it's definitely winter by this point because I've got two thick, kind of heavy blankets over me, and I'm trying my best to fall asleep, something that I've always struggled with. And I'm staring out of the door to my room, which looked into the kitchen, and I'm just looking at how the light was reflecting off of the oven door, like the handle, And I know that because this sequence of events got seared into my memory after this. So I'm wide awake, and all of a sudden I felt a very quick, strong slap, best I can describe it. It went the entire length of my right side, like from my head to my feet. I'm a side sleeper, so I was laying on my left side. So it was just like all of the side that was facing up. And the reason that I know that it was third grade is because all that my kid brain had to relate that feeling to was it was like my third grade teacher hitting that whole side of me with a giant paddle. Like that's just how it registered in my head. So the pain causes me to grab my side and look to the side of the room where I guess if there was anything in my room, it would have had to have been. So the far side across from me. So all the way across my room. And yeah, I mean, it's a single wide trailer, so it's not that far, but it's probably still 5 or 6 feet. But as far away as possible from me, I see both of those blankets like they were just thrown, and they landed draped over my TV, sitting on top of a built-in dresser. It was like a kind of I don't know how to describe it, like cut out there, and then a like top where you could put things, and then it had drawers. And I'm just completely confused at this point. I don't think I even properly panicked about it, and I definitely didn't want to have to bother my parents again and just get lectured on how they need their sleep and I'm just dreaming. So I hesitantly get up, snatch the covers back, and dive back onto the bed, covering myself up as tightly as I can. And then I just laid there trying to kind of process what could have happened. And I'm laying there and struggling to go back to sleep, obviously, or still struggling to go to sleep, rather. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes pass, and I'm just starting to think, okay, maybe I'm okay. Whatever that was is over. And like at that moment, something rips the blankets from out of my tightly clenched fist and off of my body, and I watch them as they vanish off the foot of the bed. Not sure where this courage came from. I'm guessing that it was just born out of my frustration, but I sit up real quick and I scramble to the end of the bed, and I'm trying to like peer over and check if I could see what could have done this, and I still get chills at this part. Like the hairs are standing up on my arm as we speak. And I rarely ever tell this part of the story, but my covers were there, and best I can explain it, they were like fanned out. It wasn't like they were in a lump. They were like fanned out, but there was a big hump in the middle of it, like something was underneath them. Needless to say, I was out. I was gone. When my frustrated mom walked me back in, and she cut on the light to show me, look, there's nothing in here. As the light turned on, I watched that lump flatten out. Of course, she didn't see it, and she was looking at my bed with no covers on it, and of course, that was just totally dismissed when I said something. But there's a long list of things like this, and plenty, they're even worse, that took place out there. And like I said, there's too many to try to cover here, but I will just real quickly tell you about one more thing, because it really changed things, the whole dynamic of being out there. And that was the night that my mom went from being a hardened skeptic to a full-fledged believer. So, and this is a crazy story. The first two stories that I just told you, I had a few little notes, talking points basically, so that I was sure that I got everything in like it needed to. This one's totally off cuff, so bear with me here. So I was staying at a friend's house, and my dad, like I said, he was working nuclear security, and he was gone all night. He worked a night shift, and he got back in about 6:30 or so. And so it's just my mom at the house, and she goes, she's laying down in bed, and she starts hearing something. She said it sounded like pictures were just being knocked off the wall in the living room, like loud noises and crashing sounds coming from the living room. She's the only one there, so of course she gets a gun, and she goes creeping down the hallway into the living room. Nothing is out of place. Not a single item. There's nothing that explains all the noises that she was hearing. So she's kind of freaked out, but she checks all over. There's nobody there. The doors are locked, windows are locked. So she's like, I don't know what that was, but I'm going to go back to bed. So she goes and lays down. No sooner did she get into bed than it started again. So she gets up even quicker this time. She's determined to catch what's going on. The sounds are still happening as she reaches into the kitchen, which, it's a small trailer. So in the kitchen, you can see the living room, and you can kind of see my bedroom. Nothing out of place, nothing going on. Checks my room, no one in there, no one else is in the house. Nothing to explain away what happened. So she's like, I don't even know what to do about this. She's going to try to go back to bed one more time. But before she goes in bed, she decides, well, I'm going to use the bathroom. So she goes into the bathroom, closes the door, and as the door shuts, she starts hearing the same sounds, even louder, coming from her bedroom on the other side of the wall of the bathroom. This freaked her out so bad. She spent the night in the floor of the bathroom. If you know my mom, which obviously you don't, but if you did, you would understand how crazy that is. I mean, this woman was such a skeptic. She would find ways to explain away anything that happened. She would never give it any kind of credence. But after that night, even she flipped and had to admit that something strange was going on at this place. It wasn't the house, it was the land. And about that black spot, touch back to that real quick. I don't know for certain, but I did find out that the guy that was shot on the property did die in the front yard near the road, which is where that black spot was. I can't say that that's where he died, but it's weird, and it's definitely close to it, and I have no other explanation for it. So, there's that. That's the story of my extremely haunted childhood home. Well, at least a few events that happened there. It's a very long story. But I said all that to say that hauntings, they happen, and I don't know what they are. I can't say for certain that it's There's some intelligence to it. I know that. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know what happens on the other side. But there are entities that are conscious, that make decisions, that have feelings, that will communicate. And then there are residual ones. They're kind of like just stuck in a loop, it seems. And nothing that you do really influences them. They're just going to keep doing whatever it is that they do. I've ran into both several times. I'm telling you from experience that it is real. I don't understand it. I don't purport to understand it. But it happens. And if you've never experienced it for yourself, I totally understand being skeptic. I absolutely would be. Had I not lived through the experiences that I've lived through, definitely would not think that it's real. If you don't have something tangible, and then you've got science saying, it's impossible, it's not real, we can't prove it, blah, blah, blah. You've got all the other skeptics in your head. You've got, you don't see the reality of it portrayed from any point of authority. So it's very easy to dismiss. It's never happened to me, it can't be real. But I'm telling you, there is something out there beyond what we understand. I've brushed up against it way more times than I would like to. So it happens. So the haunting that happened in Amherst very well may have been real. It's very well documented. It's lived on as a very prominent story and cited quite often as the best documented case of paranormal and particularly poltergeist activity in the world. So, while I can't say what Hubble's intentions were, and while I can't prove that Esther wasn't faking it, I can say that there is a possibility that everything happened the way we were told. It's equally likely that Hubble saw it as an opportunity to make some money and capitalize off of it. How much or to what degree that biased his, writing on the subject, that's up for interpretation. But the book's in the Discord if you want to read it. It starts off with an affidavit, a signed and notarized affidavit that everything that he wrote in the book occurred the way that he's testifying to it have happened. That adds a little bit of credence to it, at least. It's definitely something worth considering. So, if you're interested, it's in the Discord for you. And that's pretty much all that I've got for you guys this evening. I've got a really, really good creepy one coming up for the crescendo of all of this that's happening on Halloween night. I think that you're going to like it. It hits a lot of those folklore, urban legend kind of points that seem to stay around, that hits us in that kind of familiar place, and the most unnerving stories do. This is definitely along that line. I think that you guys will really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite, kind of creepypasta, urban legend, more modern lore out there. So I don't want to give you any more hints, though. Definitely don't want to give it away before it's time. But look forward to that. It's dropping on Halloween night. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys listening. Thank you for listening to me ramble through this story. So sleep tight out there. Tuck those bed covers under your feet, as I still do to this day. If you hear something go bump in the night, maybe just ignore it. And I'll talk to you guys again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.